Good stuff. All right, so I'm live. All right, cool. All right, so just to start over entirely, uh, when you open the brand new project from your content browser here, or content drawer, I renamed it. Um, this is where you can make, new levels, folders, that kind of stuff. So we made a new folder and called it Pong, and then we made a new level. I'll go ahead and do that real quick, just because. Call this Pong two underscore LVO. And then you double click on any asset to open it. Wants you to save stuff before you move on. So now we're in a completely blank area. The upper left hand corner here is where you get a hold of all of your like built-in objects. So I'm gonna go over to lights, grab a directional light, pop that in the scene. There's currently nothing for it to shine light on, which is why nothing changed. So I'm gonna go ahead and back in here, grab a shape, grab a cube, and then over here I'm just going to set this back to 0, 0, 0, so it's in the middle of the world. And then I'm gonna go ahead and change the size and say this is 20 by 20. So now I have a surface to work on. The next part is actually adding functionality to this. So when I right click again, I can come in here and make all kinds of stuff. Blueprint class is sort of the base thing you're going to be messing with. And you can choose a base class to override. So if I were to pick object, I'll have a thing that kind of just exists somewhere, but doesn't actually do anything. Like you can script functionality into it, but it doesn't like exist in the world. It doesn't receive input. It doesn't update every frame. It's kind of just there. If I want something in the world, I need to pick an actor. So let's go ahead. I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Actually, I don't want that. One second. If I want something in the world, I'm pick an actor. If I want something that I'm going to control, I want a pawn or a character. Pawn is for more like basic things or more like inorganic stuff, or something that just like is very unique. Character is for more like bipedal or organic sort of things. Horses, dragons, people, stuff like that. Because it already comes with a character movement component that handles stuff like walking, running, jumping, flying, and that kind of thing. The player controller and the game mode are two special classes. The game mode is the one that defines all the other things. So the game mode is the one that's like, hey, you're going to use this pawn. Hey, you're going to use this controller. You're going to use this HUD class. You're going to use this. You're going to use that. It's also important for multiplayer games, but we're not going to get into that, so don't worry about it. But in general, this is also where you would store like the rules. So again, like if you're playing a football game, touchdowns are 6 points. There's 15 people, there's 15 minutes in a quarter. There's, 4 quarters in a game. There's like all that sort of stuff would be defined in the rules because it's not necessarily about the current state of the game or any player. It's just kind of what the game is. So that's where that's what goes in the game mode. The player controller is basically in charge of like communicating your will into the game. So this is where like input goes. This is what controls stuff on the screen. This is what handles your camera. And then this also passes the input and things you do over to your pawn so it knows what it's supposed to do. So when you make a brand new anything, you need at least a pawn, a game mode, and a controller. Depending on how complicated your game is, you might be able to get away with just doing like a game mode and a pawn. But for this, we're going to do all three. So first, we made the game mode. Pawn 2, underscore GM, underscore BP. Back up here, player controller. Pawn 2, underscore PC, underscore BP. And lastly, pawn. And this is going to be our player underscore Pong2 underscore BP. And then, as I mentioned, the game mode, pop this open, and over here on the right in the details panel under classes is where you get to set all of your stuff. So this is where I can say, hey, my player controller is now going to be my Pong2. My player or my default pawn class is going to be my Pong2 guy. And then when I'm all happy with this, I can hit compile and save, and I can close this. And then I can either set this in world settings, so right here in my Pong2 game mode. This is now set, and I just kind of popped in and have no control over nothing. So that worked. Or in the project settings, if you go over here to maps and modes, this is where you can set all of your default stuff, like your editor startup map, the startup map for when the game actually is packaged and loads, and then what your default game mode is. So this is the override for this particular level. This is the one that's going to be default throughout the project. Does anybody have any questions about pawns, game modes, player controllers, or like what a level is? No questions? What's up? Okay. All right. So, like, are there any questions about what I just went over, or should I move on, or wait? What are we doing? Okay. So, all right. So, like, wait, go over like the pawn, the controller, and the game mode, or just the game mode part? Okay. So, like I mentioned, the game mode is kind of just like the class. It's the class that's in charge of the rules and loads all the other stuff. So, um, the way you can kind of visualize this is when Unreal Engine loads up, the very first thing it does is it actually loads a class called the game instance. This thing is alive the entire time. It's essentially like your main program. The game instance class then loads up the level, and the level then checks to see if there's a game mode override or if it should use the project setting game mode. From that point on, the game mode is in charge of loading all the other stuff. So your like which pawn you use, which player controller you use, which HUD class, which game state class, all that stuff is defined by the game mode. The game mode is also a globally accessible class, so everybody can get a hold of it and check with it. So the game state and the player state can check and see and be like, oh, hey, my character just got, 6 points, or my team's got 6 points. Is that cool? And they'll be like, yeah, you scored a touchdown, you can have 6 points. Or no, you just got a field goal, you don't get 6 points for that, and then it'll correct you. So the game mode is sort of there to like run stuff, and then everybody else can kind of talk to it. Um, there it is. Yes. So the so when I go ahead and pop open the game mode here, um if I were to leave, so my default pawn class here is this. If I were to leave this on default pawn and compile and save. Oh, by the way, if this ever pops up like this, it just means that there is no, like you did nothing to this blueprint. It's just default, and it's only showing you the details panel because there's really nothing else to see. So if you click this little hyperlink here, it'll open it up in the regular format. But that's basically just telling you like, hey, this is all you have to play with really at the moment. Um, if I hit play now, I actually have control over this because the default pawn has inputs set up for WASD and using your mouse to look around. So because I have this, because I picked that one in my game mode, it decided, it used that one, and then I have access to that. If I come back in here and pick my Pong 2 guy, then it's just gonna, pop in here and I can't move at all because I don't have that set up. Or lastly, if I switch this up to our regular Pong, because I think we did set up movement on this guy, I'll hit play and it'll actually pop in with this, and I can then not move yet for some reason. But in any case, I think we might set movement up in the controller. But in any case, it's literally telling it like, hey, this is the one we're going to use. Any questions on that?
Oh,
Oh, so when you like, I'm over here, I changed the default pawn class and the player controller class. Um, the most important part of doing this is making sure you actually implement this. So over here, on the right in world settings, you have to actually go to game mode override and make sure you've set this here. Otherwise, if I go to none and I hit play, it's not going to do, like, it's going to just give me the default thing because I didn't override the default game mode. So it's going to just check whatever's in project settings and use that. Project settings, it's under edit, and you go to project settings, and then on the left hand side here, maps and modes. There's a ton of stuff in here. Don't let it, feel daunting. If you have a reason to touch something, you'll know where you're going. But in here, default game mode is currently game mode base. So I can switch this to something else. However, I don't have like at some point we're going to switch this to either the Pong mode or to the main menu mode. That way I don't have to override it in every level. But the only time you really mess with this is if you have a game that like essentially just has one game mode and you're not really going to deviate too much. If you're doing, like a bunch of mini games or whatever, you'll probably be adjusting at every level anyway. Um, as I mentioned earlier, this is also where you can set your startup maps. So when I open Unreal, it comes to this Pong level by default. I can set this to some other map if I wanted. And then same thing here. When we actually package and build this project, we will set a map for it to go to initially, as well as tell it the other maps we want to have packaged. But we'll get to that stuff later. Um, project settings, you don't like. There's no like save or compile or anything. It's if you change something here, it's changed. So like when I close this, whatever I have is what it's going to be. Um, any other questions on that stuff? Chase has a question. Yeah. I mean, if you want to change the default game mode, you can. It's not going to really affect anything because when we do the menu one, the menu will have its own game mode. So it's really whatever you want to do with that. But for your own like ease of use, yeah, I usually set the editor startup to whatever map I want to work on. Otherwise, it'll just go to the default one and you have to change manually when you get here. But otherwise, it's fine. Alrighty. Let me go ahead and pop back to the other level and we're going to look at our current setup for the thing. And then we will go about our business. All right. So if I hit play here, A moves me over and we block, and then D goes back. So all good. So we have our pawn set up. We have our player controller set up. We have our inputs set up. And just a refresher on the inputs. Inside the actual pawn class. So this is the collection of components and logic that is our player class. In here on enhanced input action move. So whenever the move button is pushed, or whatever button whatever input we have assigned to the input action move, whenever that's triggered, this fires, and then we're gonna set the actor location based on our math over here, and we're gonna pass that in as an argument, and this will actually move us. The inputs, the like turning on of the inputs is this. So basically just get a hold of the input subsystem and tell it, hey, use this mapping context. The actual mapping contexts and inputs are in here. We made our input action asset. This is essentially just a data class that holds, some variables. This is, a Boolean, an enum, two arrays, another enum, two more booleans, another enum. So and a string. So this is just holding data for us, and then the input action class is going to actually hold a bunch of these, along with some other associated data. So here we're just defining this is what move is. It's we have an action called this. It returns this type of information about when the input is hit. And does it have any default triggers or modifiers like dead zones or is it part of a combo, stuff like that? And then the context mapping, which is the thing we actually assign here. So this is the thing I'm actually telling the input system about. Is, like I said, just an array of actions and then the inputs that we're assigning to them. And then each input gets to override the triggers and modifiers and stuff. So, all right. Okay. There we go. Have the inputs, but it won't move. All right. So get out of here. All right. So first things first is the input context mapping looks like this, essentially. So we've assigned, left, right, A, and D. So the left and right are the arrow keys. And then left and A both have modifiers on them, and the modifier is negate because when you hit the button, it'll return either 0 for not being pressed or 1 for being pressed. And then here, negate is times -1, so we're going to -1 instead of a +1. As long as that is done, and then inside the player controller, you're adding the mapping context. And then inside the pawn, you're actually using the input. If all three of those are in place, then I'll need to see what you're doing so I can take a stab at why it's not working. Now, be super careful. That's another thing here. Triggered is going to fire every single frame while the button is pushed. if I open this and plug started in, this is only going to fire once. So it'll fire when I push the thing, and I'll move approximately like a centimeter, and then I won't move anymore. So got to be careful exactly which one of these pins you're using, because they do fire for different reasons. Okay, sure. All right, cool. I'll go ahead and stop sharing real quick so we can do that. Okay. Yep, negate. All right, and then in the player controller. Okay. And then so yeah, all right. And then in the player Pong, uh, come on down here. Let me see what's up with this. Slide left slightly. I can't quite see. Okay, yeah. All right. So it's a return value, and then we got our new location stuff. Um, go back out to your level quick. Let me make sure that you're using the game mode, and then we'll make sure the game mode is all right, cool. And then the game mode is using your player controller and your pawn. Okay, okay. Go ahead and back into your pawn real quick. Um, scroll down here a little bit in your variable section. Uh, yeah, click on speed for me. Uh, click on speed again. Click somewhere else real quick, and then click back on speed. There we go. Okay. So your speed is 1. That means that you're gonna move. Actually, zoom out a little more. I just want to double check this. On your graph here. You're using delta time, right? Or did we not do that yet? Yeah. All right. So, delta seconds means that your speed is going to be how much you move over 1 second. So right now you're going to move 1 centimeter over 1 second. So go ahead and make that for like 300 and see if you move then. How do you set up the hierarchies for the pawn and the controller? The hierarchies are built in. So like the controller is already the thing that receives input and automatically connects to your pawn. Um, the game mode also essentially has all the built-in code for like spawning everybody and figuring out where you're supposed to be. Like this player start here, the game mode actually has code in it that will find these in the level and then will spawn you at one. So that's just sort of stuff that you get for free. You don't have to really like work on that. But all right. So the yeah, so we have our dude, he moves, everything's great. Um, I'm gonna real quick scale this out on one of these axes. Doesn't really matter which. I think I want this just be 20 if I remember correctly. And then all right, cool. If I hold Alt before I click and then click on this arrow and pull, it'll make a duplicate. And you'll notice that this is very hard to see, so I'm going to go ahead and set this back to the world grid material so I can actually see what I'm doing. And then again, hold Alt, click and drag, pull you back to the middle. And then I'm going to spin this 90 degrees. Or actually, you know what? Yeah, I'll spin this 90 degrees just so we can have our bouncing. And then maybe we'll get rid of it later. Pop that there, and then same thing. Hold Alt and drag it back this way. So move that forward a little bit. So now if I hit play, I have walls and I'm stuck inside the walls. Nice. So now that we have walls, the next thing we need to do is we need to make a ball so that we can actually, start doing something with this. Just like our pawn, we need to make a blueprint class for this that's going to define what a ball is. Because we do not want to take direct possession of this thing, it's not going to be a pawn, but we do want it to be in the level. So it's going to be an actor. The actor class, and then I'm just going to name this ball _ BP. And I'm going to pop this open. And I'm going to go ahead and just add a static mesh component, and it's going to be a sphere. You can do this either way. If I click here, it's going to just add a static mesh component that is already set to sphere. If I click this one, I'll just have to set it to sphere myself. So right here, I would just, if I click the other one, I would just come here and then do that. And then this also names it sphere for me, so I don't have to rename stuff, but I'm going to call this ball mesh just to be explicit. I'm also going to make this the root and compile and save. And then I'm just going to double check that it is blocking everything, so it will bounce off stuff. So now I have a ball, and I'm going to go to the event graph, and it's not going to overlap anything, so I can get rid of that. We are going to use tick to make it move because it's not going to receive any input, and I do want this to move every frame. And begin play, we will use just not right now. So first things first, we want to make this thing move. So we're going to set actor location. Whoops, no. Actually, we'll do this. Set actor world offset. So the difference between this one and set actor location is looking for a specific place to go. I want to know the exact position we're going to go to. Add actor world offset basically means tell me in world coordinates, so XYZ based on the world, not based on your local character here, which direction you want to move and how far. I already know where you are. I just want to know how much of a change in location and in which direction. So essentially, this part we don't have to do, and we just need this. Because this is going to give us the direction we're trying to go, and this is just telling us where we were initially. So same as before, multiply delta seconds by some speed. So promote that to a variable so we can hold on to it and mess with it. We can even call this ball speed just because we have other speeds and it'll make it easier for us to remember. And I will immediately set this to not 0 because we want this to move and we don't want to try and figure out why. And then we need to give this a direction. So if I right click on this pin here, in addition to promote to variable, there's also a few options down here. This lets me switch out what type of variable this is expecting. So we're going to switch this to a vector, and then I'm going to promote it to a variable. And the reason I did that is because this will automatically make this a vector type. It'll give me my yellow pin where I want it to be, and then I can name this, and this is going to be direction. And then compile, so I can set the default value, and by default, I'm going to just say it's going to move north, or 1 on X, basically. And then we'll just kind of plug that in here, and we're sort of good to go. The problem with this is going to be, and actually here, I'll go ahead and we'll test this real fast. Nope. Got to drive one in the level first. So, boop, hit play. So it goes that way, and then it hits a thing and it stops. That's cool. We moved. That's great. However, we do want to sort of go other directions. So the next thing we want to do is when we hit something, we want to bounce off of it. I'm going to right click here, split this open. And this gives me all of the information from the hit. So when it hit the side and it stopped, it did in fact give me information about that happening. So first things first, I want to know, did I actually bump into something and stop? This is a Boolean that's going to return that answer. You can either type in branch or you can type in if, because this is essentially an if statement and it will recognize that for you. So if it's true that we did have a blocking hit, then I want to change direction. So I want to grab my direction here and I'm going to set this to be something else. Now, because this fires every frame, when I change this here, the next time it comes through to evaluate this, this will be a different number and this will do a different thing. So my current direction and the normal from the thing I hit. Normals are the direction perpendicular to a surface, which means the direction directly away from it. So like the top of your desk, the perpendicular direction from that is straight up. We want to bounce away from this thing using the normal of the surface that we hit. So we're going to get the reflection vector off of our direction and the normal. Unreal is super nice, and we don't have to actually do any math for this. We can just type in reflection, and it will give me get reflection vector. It wants to know which direction I was moving and which direction the surface was facing so that it can tell me which way I bounced off. So either of these should return basically the same thing. I just usually use the impact normal. And then last thing I want to do is, and I don't think you actually have, I think this gives me back a normalized direction. But we're going to double check and normalize it anyway. Normalize just means that we're making this a length of 1 so that whatever direction we're going in, we're not going in that direction any faster than we would be normally. Or any faster than we should be. Because if our vector length is like 1.2, then we'll be going 120% of our speed. We don't want to do that. So if I hit this, boop, and this is going to kind of bink back and forth. Now that's great, but this is not going to really help me very much in a, Pong game situation. So the next thing we got to do is we need to give this a direction that's not sort of stuck in place. So we're going to make a custom event. And this is going to be called change direction. then I'm going to grab direction here and set it to be something that it's not. So we're going to pop into here. Normalize, because I want to give this a normalized direction. And then I'm going to split this open. And we want to leave Z at 0. But we want to give it a random number for X and Y. And we want to do random float in range. And we're going to need 2 of these because the way these work, these floating nodes, every time a node that they're attached to fires, they fire. So if I had like a print string, this, and then another print string, and I attach this to all 3 of them, they would all 3 get a different number. Conversely, if I plug this into 2 different pins on the same node being fired by the same thing, this will only fire once, and these will both get the same number. So we have to have 2 separate nodes to get 2 separate answers. This works out just fine because I actually want these to be slightly different anyway. So -1 and 1 is going to be our direction for Y. So it can either go straight that way or straight this way. X, on the other hand, I don't want it to go straight to the left or straight to the right. So I'm going to go ahead and limit this, and this is going to be -0.7 and 0.7. So that when it chooses a direction, it does not try and kick it straight to the side, so we don't get into that ping pong situation. Compile and save, and then I'm going to call change direction from here. The reason we're doing this is because begin play, I want to change direction, but I'm also going to change direction every time we score, and I put the ball back in the middle. So I don't want to be stuck having to like repeat this. So I just made it here, and then I can call as many times as I want from as many different places as I want. So now we have that. Let's go ahead and check this out real quick. And now it came straight at me and bopped over that way. Nice. And if I hit play, it'll go that way. That was fairly far to the, like, that was very hard on the X, actually. I don't like that so much. There we go. That's better. We're going very, I don't like that. Let's go ahead and make that smaller. Oh, maybe 0.5. Anyway, so now we got our ball. It bounces back and forth. Does anybody have any questions on anything we did here or why we did what we did? All right. Oh, we got one. All right. Why are you using the random one specifically? Because we want to get a random value. Otherwise, it's going to just spit us out in the same direction every time, and it'll be very easy for you to get like a pattern going. So like you know, like if it always kicked you out to the, you know, like diagonal left towards your character, then you know, oh, I always have to move left when I start, kind of thing. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And another thing we can do actually is here. Let me if I can get, we'll get ball speed and well add, I don't know, 20, and then we'll set that. So now every time it bounces, it'll also speed up. which will make it a little more interesting. But yeah, I mean, essentially you're just kind of playing with stuff here. Play, and now every time it bounces, go just a little bit faster. Alrighty. So the next thing we need while I'm waiting for any other questions is we need a goal. We need this to go somewhere, and then for us to know about it, and then put this back in the middle. So the walls, they are static meshes, yeah. So the get this out of the way. There we go. You can see over here in the outliner, static mesh actor. This is great because this is a blueprint, or this is a C++ class that they defined for you. But essentially, it's just an actor that only has a static mesh component, pretty much like our ball. It's like identical to the ball, actually. And then, yeah, I just scaled one that's assigned to be using a cube. I could switch this to like a cone, and now it looks stupid, but you can do it. There we go. Put that back. But yeah, that's all it is, just a 3D object. And then just real quick, if I put my cursor over top of this, well, it doesn't matter. Any one of these really. This will give you all your details about it. You can see here that it does have a collision volume. Like the 6 or 7 thing down says collision primitives. Not everything does. If you pick something that doesn't have a collision primitive, then it won't, like, blocking won't happen. Unless you turn on physics, in which case it'll use the actual geometry of the object. But yeah, we'll talk about that kind of stuff later. Put this back somewhere. Alrighty. So next thing we need to do real quick is we need a goal. So just like before, make a new blueprint class. It's gonna be actor because again, it's gonna be a thing in the world, and then we'll go ahead and call this goal underscore BP, and then pop this open. And this could have a static mesh if you wanted to. The only thing I really need this to have is a collision volume. So I can come in here and just type in collision, and I can pick a box, a capsule, or a sphere. I'm gonna pick a box because that's what I want for this one. Go ahead and call this our goal volume. And I'm gonna use this essentially as a trigger. This isn't gonna move, so I don't have any real reason to get rid of the default scene root. And actually it being here is mildly helpful because I can actually drag this up now and line this up so that the default scene root is at the bottom, which you'll see why it's helpful here in a minute. In the meantime, though, I can go ahead and change my extent. The cubes in the level I scaled because they are 3D objects. Because this is a volume, you can just change the extent and leave the scale at 1. Just like the capsule in the character and the spring arm. So right here for this, I'm gonna go ahead and set Y to be, I don't know, 1,000, and we'll set Z to be 200 just because, and then I'll go ahead and pull this up so that's more or less at the bottom of that. File and save, and then if I drag one of these into the level, you'll see that my little cursor, my hand, is on that default scene root, and that's actually where I'm dropping it on the ground. So having this here makes it easier to just kind of drag and drop and be done. Whereas before, if I left it as this is the root, it would have popped in here and I'd have to pull it up manually every time. So go ahead and this is actually a little bit big. Let's go ahead and make this now like 500. You can change this on the thing in the level too, but if you can get the default set, then that's better. Next is the event graph, and we don't really need anything on begin play, and we don't really need anything on tick. We kind of only care when something overlaps this. And by default, the trigger volumes or the collision volumes will be set to overlap all by default. So anything that goes inside will be triggering overlaps, and then the generate overlap events boolean is also turned on by default. So anytime something overlaps the volume, since that's the only thing in here with collision, it'll tell me about it and what it is. So there's a couple of ways we can check this. I'm essentially just going to cast. And then if it is in fact the ball, this is going to fire. If it's not the ball, this is going to fire. A lot of people get confused by casting. You are not reaching into memory or going to find anything. This is literally saying, is this A? So I have a random actor. Is this a ball? And if it is a ball, then it'll, treat it as such, and I'll get the ball reference type so that I can access ball type things. If it's not, then it'll go fail, and this will be empty. Essentially, when you're doing casting, you're just checking like, hey, is this thing I already have a hold of actually this more specific thing? And if the answer is yes, then we were successful in casting. A lot of people think for some reason that you're like reaching out and like, oh, I'm going to cast to the ball, so I'm going to get a hold of it. No. You have to already have the ball. Once I have it, then I can play with it. So that's what we're doing here is we're checking to see is this thing, because I know it's a thing, but is this thing a ball? And if it is, then we want to call another function that I have to make yet. Let me go back to the ball real fast, and we're going to make a custom event. We're going to call this respawn. Whoops. And then I'm going to also make a starting location variable, and this is going to be a vector. And we're just going to set this off begin play because wherever we are at the very beginning is going to be our starting location. We're going to go back to that. So I'm going to go ahead and get actor location. And this is going to just tell me where I was in the level, and then we'll be good to go. And then when we respawn, we're going to change direction and set actor location back to our starting location. Whoops. And we're going to not use sweep or teleport or anything because I don't actually care if we bump into something. I just want to go back to the middle. So compile and save. And because I just made this, if I hadn't hit compile first, when I came back over here to goal, this would not know what that was because I never confirmed it existed. So be super careful trying to use like stuff you just made. Always compile, and then you'll be able to get a hold of it. So I pull off here. We're going to call respawn, compile and save. And then now if I come out here to level and one over here and hold alt and drag and do another one over here. Of course, you're going to be like that. So you click on goal volume, and I can just say this is going to be longer. So 700, 800, the same thing. Click on goal volume, 100. By the way, so when you click on something here in the level, I'm messing with this particular instance. This does not affect like the blueprint you made. This is just this one in particular. I'm changing this particular setting. Same thing with when you scale something out here in the level. I scaled this cube. This is not scaling all the other cubes. When I click on one of these components on this particular instance, I am again just messing with this one component on this one instance. Which is why I had to change it on both of them. And if I drag a new one out, the new one will be set back to the default. But there we go. And so every time it touches the thing, it's going to go and snap back to the center. It's going to change direction, and then everything's going to be all good. Anyone have any questions about the ball or the goal? There we go. Dragged out starting location to get active location, but couldn't find it. So if you pull off of starting location and try and type in yeah. Wait, oh yeah, my bad. So if you pull off of here and type in get active location, it should pop up. Yeah. That's what I was gonna say. If you pull off this side, it won't do it because it's looking for connections this way, and that it's not gonna do it for you. Same with if I was trying to print this out, I can't pull off here and type in print string. I mean, I could, but it's not gonna actually do it. Whereas if I pull off of here and type in print, it will. And then I can actually connect this because it'll make a connector for me. But because the connector wasn't initially part of this, it won't make that like context connection for you. But yeah, just make sure left sides go to right sides and try and like it'll take a while to figure out like, oh, this one's a pure, this one's a not, or whatever. But essentially you want to try and pull off of whatever you're messing with and then do that. What was the name of the top custom event? I just called it respawn. You can call it pretty much whatever you want. I wouldn't call it reset because reset is actually already a thing. But yeah, I mean, you can call it really whatever you want. Any other questions? While I'm waiting for anybody else that has a question, the other thing we can talk about is instance editable variables. So as I mentioned a second ago, when you click on one of these, I can mess with this stuff. When you gotta change direction at the top. Direction at the top. Which one? Change direction, set active location. Okay. But yeah, so the like when you click on something out here, you can mess with these properties. These are instance editable. So if I decide that I would also like, say, my speed to be instance editable, I can hit this little eyeball here, or if I click on the actual variable, there's a checkbox here. By turning that on, I will now have access to speed out here. And I can say that this one's going to be 2000. And now if I hit play, bounces around all crazy. So, oh, and then also this little arrow over here will set it back to default. So it'll snap back to 300 then if you want to put it back to what it's supposed to be. But so turning that on lets you mess with individual settings of an individual thing. We're going to use that later on for the AI because we're gonna assign it the ball instead of getting it dynamically. Or actually, I'll show you how to do both, but we're going to do it this way for that. Anybody else? Questions, problems, concerns? Say that again? Oh, the project? Sure. Yeah, we can do that. I mean, that's all I have for today, unless you want to keep going.